I'm Michael Klam, host of Conversations with Poets. We are here at the San Diego Public Library in downtown San Diego in the Rare Books room, and we're very lucky to have our first Poet Laureate, Ron Salisbury, here. We're going to ask Ron some questions and see if we can get some inspiration for all to publish their poetry, perform their poetry, make their poetry stronger, and express yourselves. Ron, we're going to ask you a few things about your teaching. We'll ask you about your experience in the Post and what it means for San Diego. We want to give a shout out to the library for hosting us. We want to also thank the San Diego Entertainment and Arts Guild for supporting the San Diego Poetry Annual, and the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture for supporting Ron. Hey Ron, tell us a little bit about being Poet Laureate and what it means for San Diego.
Figuring out what it means in these times has been very difficult because my appointment was coincidental with COVID arriving, and along with that required a whole change in what I thought that my job would be, which is to promote poetry in San Diego and also to promote the city of San Diego. And I'm much more of an in-person person. I like teaching workshops, and I like doing readings in person and getting out and meeting the poets. Well, that's just not going to happen. So we had to do everything tech-wise, and that required me also to learn stuff that was really, I was not that knowledgeable of at the beginning. But it's just to give you an idea, and this is probably a very old joke, but before I was appointed, the sound that a cartoon car made was zoom. Now it's a whole new meaning that's with it. But we've adapted, and we have a public project going to where we are outreaching to poets, and they have a chance to read each other's work and also to be recognized, and also for me to do a little craft work with them. So the outreach has been electronically and much less than I had hoped for, but we've all had to adapt. It hasn't been easy for the city, and it hasn't been easy to figure out how to be a poet in these times.
Any silver linings to Zooming and going virtual? You getting folks from other parts of the world coming in?
Yes.
Or have you had more people who wouldn't necessarily get out to a class or out to a brick and mortar reading? Any silver linings that you've seen?
Just my personal, because I teach poetry through the San Diego Writers Inc. My class sizes have doubled. As a matter of fact, we have to have a separate class, two classes. And because of Zoom, there are many, many people. I would say at least half of the people would never travel down to the central area of San Diego to attend a class, which is how it was done before. I have students in Canada. I have them in Albuquerque. I have them spread out beyond the borders of San Diego County. And I expect that this experience is going to affect how I do my work from now on. It has created a wonderful opportunity to reach people that I not normally would reach.
Right. And what about being Poet Laureate? Do you feel the sense of presence that's stronger and has changed you in ways as a writer? Has your poetry changed because you've got this title now?
No. But I will expand. First off, I had no idea what a Poet Laureate actually did. I knew that it represented a segment, either geographic or a population. But I also had no idea how the appointment as Poet Laureate happened, which is strange. I mean, I've been in poetry for a long time, but it never occurred to me. It seemed as though somebody called you on a phone and said, "We have decided you are Poet Laureate of whatever." Well, that hasn't turned out to be what is happening. No, there was an ad in a newspaper, and I answered it for San Diego and went through the process. It was an extensive application process of what you do, submitting poems and your academic history and a position paper, all kinds of things, and I have no idea how many people initially applied. They applied to be Poet Laureate, which is foreign to me to think of that, applied to be one. And so there were 3 of us that were finalists, and we went in front of a committee of 6 people that all had a poetry background, all had been experienced in various forms of poetry. And you had to do a reading. We all had to answer the same 6 questions that was there. And it was like, going through a beauty contest or something. And apparently I wore the right shoes that day.
There you go. You wore a flannel, right?
No,
nice,
I wore
flannel.
red shoes.
My
friend said, wear red shoes, and I did. So
slip-ons, right?
All of you listening, remember that.
Yeah, with the red shoes. Isn't that right? Tell us about Poets of Resilience.
Poets of Resilience. The name comes from the word resilience, was how to recover quickly after a challenge. And that doesn't mean necessarily that it has been agonizing. It can be also recovering from a new experience that's with it. So it's a chance to be able to give poets a chance to be heard. And I have really kind of geared it as carefully as I can towards seniors, which are many, kind of a lost crowd of people that aren't heard too loudly under normal conditions, and under the pandemic they're heard even less, especially poets. So I really wanted to try to concentrate on people that were my age and older with the world of poetry that was with it. So we have 6 monthly presentations, one at every month, starting in the 1st of April, which was National Poetry Month, and continuing on into the fall, and then we'll have some kind of a open reading, probably on Zoom. But it begins with what I do best, which is I've been teaching poetry for 40 years. And so it's a craft lecture. I have guest poets that come on, and we talk about how poetry has influenced or changed them, how they've handled it in the last year. And not only that, many of these people have their teachers too, and they also have poets that they're in communication with. How have these poets responded? We did a little pilot project at the 1st of last year, and there was a lot of response. And so I saw over 200 poems from people in San Diego that wrote about the experience, which was just fresh, and we had no idea. We were all being isolated. The poems that are coming in now have hope. It's almost as though I find less poetry about the experience in the past, and the poems that I'm looking at now that poets have submitted to the Poets of Resilience to be published on our website are ones looking forward more than anything else.
And on the website, there's a zip code map, is that right? So when
you
go, you can find poets in your community, isn't that right?
Yeah, one of the sections is the map of San Diego by zip code. And you can, it's color-coded. It's got a yellow code to it. And the brighter the yellow, the more poets from that zip code have submitted poems. You can click on that, and all of the poets that have listed there come up, and you can look at their name, you can click on their name, and their poem comes up. You can click on that.
Yeah, I think I noticed that North Park had a lot of poets, a lot of posted poems, yeah?
Yeah, and actually along the coastline, too.
Along the coastline, that makes sense, right? See, that's what I'm saying, close the beaches, what are we going to do?
I know it.
What are we going to do here in town? We're also going to have a special section in the San Diego Poetry Annual. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How are you going to curate those poems? Are you going to have submission guidelines for those poems that will go into the annual?
No, they're selected from the just the general population of poetry that's being submitted to me. I promised everyone I would read every single poem, and also you can also ask questions, because if I get too many questions, I'll have to generalize the answers to it. But so far I've been able to respond with emails back to them. Out of that group of poems, I get the opportunity, thanks to the Arts Guild and Bill Harding, I get to pick probably 25 poems. He hasn't told me exactly, but that's somewhere in the range of what I'll be doing. And also to use them as examples of what I'm experiencing now. So it is not necessarily judging. There's no criteria. It's been very open-ended, and it is ones that I feel serve as examples of the experience of this time that's with it. So it's a great chance for poets and myself too.
Most definitely, and thank you for that, by the way. I think one of the things that people are looking for is that first publication, or to feel like they have a voice in the community, for sure, and thanks for doing that work. When I was looking at some of your poems, one of my favorites is called Not the First. And will you talk to us a little bit about the beginning for you, what inspired you, give us a writer and maybe a poem, and give us a sense of your personal inspiration and your journey as a poet.
My journey has been a long time. It started when I was probably 11 years old in the state of Maine, and was first by a teacher read a poem by Robert Frost. And from that point on, it was like, this seems to be what I want to do with my life. And it's been that, even though I've had many careers and many other types of jobs, I have written and taught poetry for a long time. That's with it. Had some great opportunities. There is an advantage of being my age, because I came of age when some of the world of poetry in the United States was just beginning to expand. Back in the early 80s, there were very few writing conferences. Now they're everywhere. Well, I got to go to one. I lived in Northern California, and I went to the Napa Valley Writers Conference for 4 years. And it was one of the few in the United States, and every major poet in the United States was there. So this was the great time. It was coincidental, and it influenced me. And the one poet out of this that has influenced me was somebody that I got to meet for the first time in Napa, and it's a poet named Jack Gilbert. He died in 2012, but he was inspirational. He was more a poet's poet. He published infrequently, but he was well respected by every poet that I know of that's there.
Yeah, he said he went 17 years without writing any poetry or publishing anything because he spent that time falling in love, right?
Yes, he has a notorious life. But he was also a scene. He sacrificed everything for poetry. He didn't care about awards or any of the other things. He basically, as long as he could live an experienced life, which was the inspiration for his poetry that was with it. He taught me valuable things. He wasn't necessarily a teacher, he was an inspiration. He would tell you things that you remembered. You and I have talked a little bit about it, but I'll repeat it. One of the things that he said, that the problem is decoration in poems, that people use too many metaphors and adjectives and adverbs, that the whole poem should be a metaphor, and that a lot of the modifiers in a poem are decoration. He said, remove every adjective and every adverb in your poem and see if there's still an engine. And if there isn't, maybe there wasn't a poem there to begin with.
Get to the story, right?
You bet, you bet. And the language is not going, the decorative language isn't going to help a poem that has no heart.
Right. Was it good? Too much lettuce?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Too much lettuce in the salad, too much lettuce in the sandwich?
That's it.
Yeah. You want to read a little bit?
Sure, I would love to. I start by reading a poem by Jack that talks about that. It's a poem called Alone, and actually it's about his wife. He was only married once, even though he was with various women of his life. And this was a young woman that was younger than him, but she died. In this poem, there's just two basic modifiers. One is long dress, and one is soft ears. And everything else is a word without decoration. It's an inspiration for me to look at my own poems when I do that. That's with it. This is called Alone by Jack Gilbert. And Michiko is his wife, his ex-wife. I never thought Michiko would come back after she died, but if she did, I knew it would be as a lady in a long white dress. It is strange that she has returned as somebody's Dalmatian. I meet the man walking her on a leash almost every week. He says good morning, and I stoop down to calm her. He said once that she was never like that with other people. Sometimes she is tethered on their lawn when I go by. If nobody is around, I sit on the grass. When she finally quiets, she puts her head in my lap, and we watch each other's eyes as I whisper in her soft ears. She cares nothing about the mystery. She likes it best when I touch her head and tell her small things about my days and our friends. That makes her happy the way it always did.
Jack had a great sense of humor.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. He was deadly serious about his poetry, though.
Indeed. Yeah, I think he said he was asked, how did you become a poet? And he said, a lot of vanity, probably. And he said, that's not a good answer, but it's the truth.
Yeah, you know, poets today are only in poetry for the money.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you're teaching, what's your advice to a poet about that, about, taking yourself too seriously?
Well, I find that, strangely enough, the more ego a poet has in the poem, probably the worse the poem is. They have a sense of it being an emanation of their soul, which in a sense it is, but at some point when it becomes public. Now, you can write your poems and never show them to anybody, and you can write them any way you want. But something happens when you put the poem out in the public, either at a workshop or publishing it. Now the audience has a participation in the creative process. And it now becomes a piece of art that leaves your soul and has to now respond to that audience. Mm-hmm. And what I find is the biggest problem is that people want to hang on to their golden poem and not treat it as a piece of art that others can experience. They're almost happy to have it be something that amazes them, and all of us sit along the side and applaud them. Mm. And that's not how poetry really works. If
a poet reads a poem and there's no applause, did the poem ever exist?
No, the poet told them, don't applaud because it interrupts me.
Bam.
See, so that's...
Will you read us another one?
Sure. This one, it goes with Jack. Jack also used abstractions, but he used them in a way that was amazing. You knew exactly what they meant. Like if we say the word love or hate or grief in a poem, I have no idea what it means. But he would build up to what that abstraction word was so that when he used it in a poem, you knew exactly what he was saying. This one, I'll tell you what, if you don't get it by the end, what the abstraction is with this. This is called, again, about his wife, Michiko Dead, by Jack Gilbert. Michiko Dead. He manages like somebody carrying a box that is too heavy. First with his arms underneath. When their strength gives out, he moves the hands forward, hooking them on the corners, pulling the weight against his chest. He moves his thumb slightly when the fingers begin to tire, and it makes different muscles take over. Afterward, he carries it on his shoulder until the blood drains out of the arm that is stretched up to steady the box, and the arm goes numb. But now the man can hold underneath again, so that he can go on without ever putting the box down. Mm. And the abstraction is grief. Mm-hmm. And he never says the word that's in it.
This poem, you wrote a poem called The Department of Hearts.
Yes.
Will you read that for us?
Sure.
And then talk about those connections, please?
Well, this also works kind of in the same way. What kind of heart? When we use heart in a poem, it's an abstraction. Can we be more specific and still create an interest? So I imagined that maybe a city has a department of hearts. So then it would have to have rules, it would have workers, it would have inspectors, and all of that.
What about the silos?
It would operate within a silo. The Department of Hearts. It is no longer a question of architecture, the heart caught in the bureaucracy of city planning. The inspectors questioned the fenestration, the 3 balconies barely supported. But the builder, survivor of devastating earthquakes with his creations, pleads for principle before logic. Doesn't the sphere of beauty count? Aristotle's ether, the 50, the divine, the rarefied fire that ignites if one lives long enough, the heart that consumes sense. Each floor, a moment left to devour with such appetite it holds the whole structure upright. One inspector checks the code book, another measures the circumference, and the third, the oldest, who really knows the building trade, removes his yellow hard hat and falls to his knees. So I feel in that, an influence from Jack Gilbert.
And so give us a sense of your process. Where did you do what you ask your students to do? Did you go through and get rid of modifiers?
Yep. I can't keep them all out. I throw a few in.
Right.
But you use them like precious gems as you place them back in.
Right.
It goes with it.
And what about students? Do you, what's your balance between encouragement and, the poem that needs work? It is craft, it is a process.
Every poem, even the worst one a student comes in with, has some part that's good. Mm-hmm. And in my workshops, we work at identifying that and what attracts us, even if it's a 2-word phrase. What is the gem? What is the part of it, if it comes down to that we first appreciate? And then we look at the poem and its effectiveness on the reader. And my students, I work with them just saying, well, I don't like this, or I don't, or I like this, I love this poem. No, that's not helping the poet. You have to be able, if you can say, I like the poem, you've got to say why. And that requires you to understand some of the craft things of writing and language. Why does it impact you? What is it that you didn't like about it, and poetically, what was the reason? So it is both of those. The first one is you got to find the goodness, because there is there, but then the other is that you just can't say, no, I don't like it. So that keeps the harshness out of it, because now you're required to know what you're talking about. So you got to do your work as a student.
You've been in this for a long time. You get more joy from writing, performing, or more joy from teaching?
Well, performing has been a little weird this past year. And doing a reading on Zoom is not like being in an audience. It's like probably, I imagine it'd be like a goldfish in the bowl. It sure isn't the same as being in the ocean. So the reading is less for me. I do enjoy writing. I write almost every single day. But when you teach a lot, you get drained a bit. I find that I'm writing less when I'm teaching more. And when I go through my summers and I don't have classes, then my writing picks up. I think there's a quotient of creativity in your body. And it gets distributed out in various ways.
The creativity quotient.
There you go.
Yeah. Will you remind us again, how do people get involved? Tell them how they can get published in the annual or get involved with Poets of Resilience.
Well, the San Diego Annual, which is going to publish poems that I choose that come out of the Poets of Resilience. If you go to the city of San Diego, if you just Google San Diego Poets of Resilience, you'll find probably 6 or 7 listings. And today we have to work on the computer. It's almost impossible not to. You just trace those links and it'll take you to the website where I am on it with my presentations. All of the presentations, each one that we do, we've done 2 at this point. We have 4 more to go. They're all there. You can go back and look at them. And so they will be eventually all 6 of these craft lectures, along with the opportunities. You can see where you can click on various links and submit your poem. You can look at my bio. You can also look about the project of resilience, and you can also look for that map that'll show you where you live or where others live. And so it's pretty easy to find.
And this is all ages, so who is
All
submitting
ages, all ages. Even though, you know, I have said that I'm interested in making sure that seniors have a voice, it is all poets. And there's a chance, there's an age category, they're big ones, so that we find out how many people in each category we're doing. You don't have to put your name down, you don't have to do anything to enjoy it. But if you care to have your poem published, we just ask you for your zip code, not for your address. We're not interested.
Yeah, the thing about poetry too is that age, you know, it's if you thought of it like a sport, you can be a great athlete in poetry all the way until the end, you know what I mean?
You hope so.
There is time, you
Yes,
know, no
there's
time like the
always
present,
time.
and you got plenty of time to go. So thanks, Ron. We want to thank you very much for being our inaugural poet for this Conversations with Poets, and for the work that you're doing and for what you're giving to San Diego. We appreciate you and love you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thanks to the Central Library and San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture, the city for supporting Ron, and the San Diego Entertainment and Arts Guild. All of the folks behind the scene, thank you guys, everybody here with us, and our publisher there at the San Diego Poetry Annual, and our direction here, Anthony Blacksher. And you mentioned Bill Harding, the founder of the San Diego Poetry Annual, and a lot of what's going on in San Diego wouldn't have been possible without Bill, so a shout out to Bill. Thanks, everybody.